Whether it's the menopause, the indignity of ageing, or talking about race, we've never shied away from difficult topics on this show. And today we're tackling the discomfort, awkwardness and fear that occasionally surrounds how a lot of us talk about disability. Some people think this is a bit of a minefield, Sophie, and I wanted to ask you, so say, for example, I think a lot of people watching this, if they see somebody with a visible disability, it might go through their head, do I mention it? Don't I mention it? Is there an etiquette? What is the correct way?
I wish we had a straightforward answer to this. I wish there was a template, almost like, you know, a script that we could give out to make this problem go away, because it's a real problem. I think for everyone involved, I think there's so much awkwardness. I mean, we know that Scope has done a huge amount of research into the awkwardness that surrounds disability. It's a fact. People are awkward to talk about disability and it's awkward to talk to disabled people. So I would say in this situation as a wheelchair user, that the most obvious thing to say is use common sense, be kind, be respectful. The fact is, I think people sort of don't seem to realise that there's a time and a place for asking really personal questions. And when it comes to asking about disability, say it's asking about your specific disability. So I've been asked about my disability at work, in the supermarket, in a taxi, you know, can you have children? Can you walk? These are all really personal questions, OK, which come with being a wheelchair user. So I've got to navigate how I respond to that, and it depends on my mood, how I might reply. But the fact is, when it's a stranger asking you at an inappropriate moment, we've got to recognise that can be quite harmful, and it's really invasive, and it's a little bit too curious, and it sort of reaches over your boundaries, right? I think as well, if you then go into a workplace and you've got people asking you about your disability in that space too, that puts you in a space where you might feel obliged, you have to be compliant, you might have to then start disclosing stuff about your life that you wouldn't normally. So I think when it comes to the etiquette, Jane, I think there isn't one. And we've been talking about this a lot this morning, today, about how we discuss this subject. It's one we could talk about for a long time. I think the truth of it is, I wish I could just say to each and every person I encounter, when they start to ask me those questions where I'm like, right, here we go. Here we go, here we go. I get in a taxi. Oh, what happened to you then? Oh, it had a car crash. Oh, right, so you can't walk. Right, I'm just about to, I've got phone calls to make. I'm going to work. Oh, right, so what, does that mean you can't feel your legs? You're like, who gave you permission to ask that question? I know you're trying to be polite. And one guy recently countered and said, look, mate, please, do you mind not asking me that question right now? I've got an important phone call to make. He said, oh, well, we've been told that we need to talk to disabled people about these things now. Isn't that the thing we do? And I'm like, OK, but
that's so patronising.
So it's like read the room, really.
Common sense, right?
Yeah. But
that
what about...
example is, like, you know, you think you're in the taxi going to work, so you've got your professional head on, you're about to go to work, you could be managing a huge team, a really stressful job, and that taxi driver has just taken you back to one of the most traumatic things that's ever happened to you. It could be the moment when your life changed forever, you know, and I think that's what we've got to understand. A large percent of disability is connected to trauma. It can be connected to ill-placed guilt. It can be connected to regret. It can be connected to shame. You know, it's a really triggering subject for people at 9 a.m. in a taxi on the way to work.
Can you imagine somebody coming up to you and saying, right, oh, so what happened to you? Yeah. And you're with your kids and you're doing your shopping and someone's asking you that straight up. And it might be the second or third question in, to be honest with you, sometimes it is. But even still, they don't know your story. They might know your story, but they don't know your story. And most people, I think the stats around this are a little bit unclear, but around 17 to 20% of people living with a disability actually were born with their disability.
So it's a really small minority.
It's small. It's really small. And that means the majority of disabled people acquired it. And we don't know how they acquired it, and it's not your business to know how they acquired it.
I think if you're the person asking the questions, you need to ask, where does my curiosity come from? You know, is this about me fulfilling this kind of morbid, voyeuristic thing around it? Why do I need to know? How's it going to change my life? If it's about education, isn't there a better way to educate yourself?
So could it be then that if we're going to, I know there is no such thing, but if we were going to say there is a template, the template would be to ask you questions that we would ask you if you weren't in a wheelchair. Yeah,
of course, treat you like...
Just like, you know, where are you off to?
This is a human being.
Yeah.
I know that first and foremost, when it comes to people like Katie or myself, you might see certain things before you see us, right? That's just human nature. We can't get past that. But that doesn't mean that is, you know, you can then ask anything you like. We're human beings. Yeah. So I wouldn't come up to you and ask, this is the thing. Say, for example, you were pregnant. I wouldn't come up to you and say, "Oh, so how did you get pregnant?
Yeah.
Or, is it a boy?" It's none of my
You'd be
business.
surprised, though. A lot of people do that.
Yeah.
They do. That's all that.
So
it defines you.
I think the other thing is people don't know whether they can help you or not, and they might offer to help you when you don't need it. Because my limited experience of this is when I had a stepson who was quite severely disabled. I would walk along the street with him, and then there would be a parting of the ways, and then people would look at me as if, like, what are you two human beings doing together? And, you know, sometimes this little boy would really kick off and have a tantrum. And I remember trying to get him in a car and thinking, let someone come and help me. It's perfectly OK.
Yeah.
He's screaming and shouting, and I've got the car door open, and then I'm in this situation where I'm thinking, do they think I'm, you know, stealing this child and bundling him in the car against his will? And all sorts of things come into play.
Yeah.
And then what you want is human beings to look at you and think, oh, does she need help? Yeah. Not just gulp. And it's the gulping.
Well, that's the dilemma, isn't it? It's sort of one extreme or the other. I mean, I think a lot of people almost don't talk to somebody with a disability because they are fearful that they could say the wrong thing. Would you rather that they said the wrong thing than said nothing?
No, I think that, but that's not, there is in between.
Yeah.
And I think that it's not as clear-cut as that. And I think also, so when it comes to asking for help, there is a danger of assuming that disabled people always need to be asked. I mean, I'll be sitting on the side of the street in London, looking at my phone for directions, looking around like this, and I'll be approached. Do you need help? Is everything all right? And I'm like, I'm fine. I'm fine. Do I look like I'm struggling? I think there's also you need to
read the eye contact.
Read the situation. And I know some people, it would be nice to be offered help, but you know, it's that situation where you just gauge what is the person doing. Do they look like they're struggling? In your situation, it sounded like you were having a really difficult time. It would have been probably really courteous of someone to say, do you need a hand? But when you're just getting around your day, well, we need to break that down.
They're really, really scared of interaction, aren't they? Because what you've described
is saying the wrong thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because we live in a society where people feel no embarrassment about coming up to me or you and saying, "Oh, you look old, you look tired. What's up with you?" They're really like in your face.
So I just wouldn't conduct myself like that, whether we're talking about disability or, like you say, in the supermarket, just an unsolicited opinion and thrusting it onto somebody. For me, that is basic etiquette. But it seems that if anything's visible, it's fair grabs. It's not, you know, if it's visible, I can call it out.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, very, very, very interesting conversation. I'm sure we'll return to it on another day as well.